The noise of the metal bucket dragging across the polished marble floor was the sound of her new life. Lívia, or rather, cleaning staff member number 37, felt every one of her 15 years in cardiology dissolve in the strong smell of disinfectant. That night, as she scrubbed the floor of the executive suite, the company's owner, Augusto Vilas, walked by with a group of investors. He didn't see her, not really. He just gestured in her direction and said, with a voice laden with contempt, "We need to demand more from this third-party service. Look at this slowness. Incompetence irritates me deeply." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. There, on her knees, she was not Dr. Lívia, the specialist who commanded complex surgeries. She was just a slow, invisible obstacle, judged by a man who would never imagine that the hands now holding a mop had once restarted hearts. Inside her, humiliation waged a fierce battle against necessity. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to stand up and say who she was, to throw her diploma, her experience, her dignity in that arrogant man's face. But then, the image of her daughter Helena, with her big eyes and fragile health, emerged in her mind with overwhelming force. It was for Helena that she was there. It was for the exorbitant health insurance, which this humiliating job barely covered, that she swallowed her pride and endured the looks of disdain. The pain of injustice was immense, but a mother's love was infinitely greater. She squeezed the cloth tightly, transforming her anger into fuel to endure another day, another night, another humiliation. The weeks dragged on in a grey and painful routine, a daily test of her endurance. The most difficult moment was always cleaning the executive floor bathrooms. In that sterile environment, with marble sinks and expensive soaps, Lívia saw her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The tired face, the uniform that didn't belong to her, the hair tied back. Haphazardly, once, while polishing a chrome faucet until it shone, her hands moved with the surgical precision of before. The memory instantly transported her to the operating room, to the ritual of scrubbing her hands, the anticipation, the sacred adrenaline of having a life depend on her skill. What a brutal contrast. Before, she cleared the way for blood to flow and save a life. Now, she cleaned the filth left by men who probably placed no value on their own health. She wondered what they would think if they knew that the woman emptying their trash cans had more knowledge about the organ that kept them alive than any of them. It was a heavy secret, a hidden identity that isolated her in a world that refused to see her. The exhaustion she felt at the end of her shift was not just physical, but a weariness of the soul, from carrying the weight of who she was in a place that only saw what she did. Augusto Vilas's presence in the office was like a storm brewing on the horizon. Everyone felt the change in the atmosphere. He didn't walk. He marched through the corridors, and his appraising gaze seemed to find flaws in everything and everyone. Lívia watched him from afar, from her position of invisibility, and saw the fear he inspired. One afternoon, she witnessed a scene that chilled her blood. Augusto publicly humiliated a young project manager for a minimal error in a spreadsheet. "I don't pay your exorbitant salary to receive an intern's work," he shouted in the middle of the silent office, making the young man shrink. "If you don't have the competence to do the basics, maybe you should look for a job where your mediocrity is acceptable." Lívia felt the echo of her own dismissal. It was the same kind of cruel power, the same satisfaction in diminishing another to feel superior. In that moment, her contempt for Augusto solidified. He wasn't just an arrogant man, he was a corporate predator, an exact reflection of the director who had destroyed her career. Seeing that reinforced her determination. She would not break. She would endure, not just for Helena, but as an act of silent defiance against all the Augustos of the world. The door to her small apartment was the border between two worlds. Upon crossing it, Lívia strived to leave the invisible cleaning woman behind and transform back into Helena's mother. Her daughter, an 8-year-old girl with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years, always welcomed her with a tight hug. "Mommy, you smell like lemons again," Helena said one night, with the innocent sincerity of children as she snuggled in her lap. Livia's heart broke into a million pieces. She forced a smile and invented a story about a new cleaning product she was using at home. The lie had a bitter taste. Every night was a silent theater where Livia hid her hands, rough from chemical products, her aching back, and the exhaustion that weighed on her soul. She helped Helena with her homework, read her stories to sleep, and watched her daughter's peaceful breathing, praying that the normality she tried to forge was enough. After Helena slept, Livia would sit in the dark kitchen, look at the accumulating bills and the bottle of her daughter's expensive medicine, and despair threatened to swallow her. That bottle was the symbol of her capitulation, the reason for her daily struggle. 4 months passed, and autumn brought a colder air and a new wave of pressure. A letter from the health insurance company announced a rate adjustment, an increase that would turn her already precarious budget into a mathematical nightmare. Panic began to settle permanently in Livia's chest. At work, the tension was palpable as Augusto's company prepared for a crucial meeting with a group of German investors that could define the future of Vilas Corp. Amidst this atmosphere, the world's indifference seemed even crueler. One day, while cleaning the break room, she overheard 2 secretaries complaining bitterly that their year-end bonuses might be delayed. One lamented not being able to buy a new car, while the other complained about having to postpone a trip to Europe. Livia felt a wave of fury so intense, she had to grip the sink to keep from shaking. They spoke of luxuries, of desires, while she fought for necessity, for her daughter's survival. At that exact moment, Augusto Vilas walked past the door, speaking loudly on the phone. "Cut everything superfluous. Start with the service contracts. I don't want to pay for a single drop of inefficiency." The veiled threat to her job, the one thing keeping Helena safe, was the trigger. Fear transformed into something harder, a cold resolution. She could no longer afford to just survive. Somehow, she would have to fight her way out of this abyss. The day of the meeting with the German investors arrived with a charge of electricity that could be felt in every corridor of Vilas Corp. Men and women in impeccable suits moved with a nervous urgency, while Livia, in her uniform, presented a stark contrast to all that ostentation of power. She was cleaning the glass walls of the conference room from the outside, which gave her a privileged view of the entire scene. Augusto Vilas, at the head of the table, tried to project a confidence he didn't seem to feel. Livia, with her trained eye, noticed the subtle signs that would go unnoticed by anyone else. The unusual pallor under his tan, a thin layer of sweat on his forehead despite the powerful air, conditioning the way he discreetly massaged his own left arm. She felt a shiver of recognition. And then it happened. In the middle of a sentence about profit projections, Augusto's voice failed. He clutched his chest, an expression of surprise and excruciating pain contorting his face. His eyes widened in panic before rolling back, and he collapsed sideways, falling from his chair with a dull thud that echoed through the silent room. The chaos was instantaneous. Shouts, chairs, scraping, and the complete paralysis of the most powerful people in the company, who now stared at their boss's inert body, utterly useless. In that instant, something inside Livia snapped. It wasn't a decision. It was a spontaneous combustion. The fear, the humiliation, the months of invisibility, all of it was incinerated by the flame of her medical oath, which burned intact beneath the ashes of her career. As one director yelled for someone to call an ambulance and the German investors looked on in horror, Livia dropped the cleaning squeegee, which hit the glass with a sharp noise and burst through the conference room door. A security guard tried to block her path, grabbing her arm. "Ma'am, you can't go in there," he said, confused. Livia didn't even look at his face. She pulled her arm away with a strength he didn't expect, and her voice came out firm, clear, with the authority of someone who had spent years commanding teams in life-or-death situations. "Get back! I'm a doctor. He's having an acute myocardial infarction and is in cardiac arrest." The entire room froze. The cleaning woman, a doctor, she knelt beside Augusto, ripped his expensive silk shirt without hesitation, and positioned her hands on his chest. "I need the building's emergency defibrillator now, and someone time me." Suddenly, there was no CEO, no investors, no cleaning woman. There was only a doctor, a patient, and the desperate fight for life. Time in the conference room seemed to bend around Lívia. The executive's panic turned into a shocked silence, and the only sound was her voice, steady and rhythmic, counting the compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her arms moved with a strength and endurance that seemed impossible for her stature, the result of years of practice and an adrenaline that now ran pure in her veins. The young manager, whom Augusto had humiliated days before, was the first to move, bringing the defibrillator kit and kneeling beside her, following her instructions with wide-eyed admiration. When Lívia applied the pads to Augusto's bare chest and the device began its analysis, one of the German investors, an older man named Herr Schmidt, leaned forward, observing her every move with analytical intensity. He didn't see a cleaning woman. He saw a process being executed with impeccable efficiency. "Stand clear of patient," ordered the electronic voice. Lívia made sure everyone was away and pressed the button. Augusto's body arched with the shock. Without missing a second, Lívia was back on top of him, resuming compressions, fighting with a fierce tenacity against the death that was trying to claim the man who despised her. The arrival of the paramedics was like actors entering a stage where the main scene had already taken place. They expected to find a victim on the floor and a panicked group of amateurs, but instead they found a woman in a cleaning uniform commanding the scene with the authority of an emergency room chief. The handover was incredibly professional. Male, 50s, sudden collapse approximately 6 minutes ago, witnessed cardiac arrest. I initiated CPR immediately. One shock was delivered by the AED 2 minutes ago, with return of spontaneous circulation. Pulse is rhythmic but weak, Lívia reported, in precise technical language that made the paramedics exchange a look of surprise and respect. As they stabilized Augusto and prepared him for transport, the adrenaline began to leave Lívia's body. She stood up, her legs trembling, and only then became aware of the scene. Augusto's torn designer shirt, the deathly silence of the executives who stared at her as if they were seeing a ghost, and the piercing gaze of Herr Schmidt. Before leaving, the paramedic team leader turned to her and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Doctor, whoever you are, you saved this man's life. What you did here, in that time frame, was perfect." The word doctor hung in the air, dismantling the reality of that room once and for all. They looked like a group of lifeless statues, avoiding eye contact with each other and especially with Lívia. She remained there, standing in the center of the room, the sweat beginning to cool on her forehead, painfully aware of her blue uniform, which now seemed to burn her skin under the weight of dozens of gazes. The authority that had cloaked her during the emergency dissipated, leaving her feeling naked and exposed. It was the German investor, Herr Schmidt, who broke the spell. He moved with a calm deliberation, ignoring the Brazilian directors, and stopped at a respectful distance from Lívia. His cold blue eyes analyzed her not with pity, but with a genuine and calculating interest. "Forgive my direct approach at a time like this," he began, his Portuguese carrying a heavy accent but perfectly clear. "But what I have just witnessed was the most extraordinary demonstration of competence under pressure I have ever seen. Please, what is your full name and your medical specialty?" The question was so unexpected, so professional, that it anchored Lívia back to reality. She lifted her chin and answered, her voice still a little shaky but firm. "Lívia, Dr. Lívia Silva. I'm a cardiologist." Herr Schmidt gave a short, precise nod. "Understood, Dr. Silva. Very well understood." Feeling that she could no longer breathe in that environment, Lívia muttered an incomprehensible excuse and almost ran out of the room. She didn't go to the cleaning supply closet, her former refuge, but hid in an empty service corridor, leaning her back against the cold wall and finally letting her body tremble. The reality hit her like a gigantic wave. She had saved the life of the man who was the personification of her current misfortune. The irony was so cruel, so absurd, that she almost laughed, but the sound that came out was a choked sob. What would happen now? What would they do with the cleaning woman who turned out to be a specialist doctor? Would they fire her for touching the boss, for breaking every company protocol? The panic for Helena returned with full force. Maybe it would have been better to stay quiet, to let Augusto's fate run its course, but she knew she couldn't. The oath she had taken was engraved on her soul. As these thoughts assaulted her, she began to hear the whispers. Employees from other floors, drawn by the commotion, pointed discreetly in her direction. That's her, the cleaning lady. It was her. Her protective invisibility was gone forever, replaced by an uncomfortable and judgmental spotlight. She was no longer a shadow, she was a phenomenon, and that, in a different way, was terrifying. The next morning, Vilas Corp was a territory of silent chaos and whispered rumors. The news of Augusto's collapse and the heroic intervention had spread like a virus, and the identity of the savior was the only topic in every corner. Lívia had called the cleaning company, reported sick, and stayed home, unable to face the stares and questions. Meanwhile, in the boardroom, the emergency was of a different kind. The executives who had witnessed everything were in damage control mode, but the situation was complex. The main problem wasn't Augusto's health, but the presence of Herr Schmidt, who had postponed his return flight and was now making demands. "We can't just offer her money to disappear," argued one of the directors, sweating coldly. Schmidt made it clear that the company's human capital integrity is in question. He literally asked us, "What kind of company are you that allows a talent of this caliber to clean floors?" He sees this as a symptom of deep mismanagement, not a heroic story. Lívia's revelation was no longer a public relations embarrassment. It had become a crucial variable in the negotiation that could save or break the company. They saw her as a problem, an anomaly that exposed the cracks in their perfect structure, not understanding that, for the investor, she was the only proof of value he had seen so far. Far away, in a sterile white hospital room, Augusto Vilas awoke to the rhythmic sound of a heart monitor. The first sensation was of a profound and humiliating weakness, something he, a man who saw vulnerability as a character flaw, had never experienced. His wife was by his side, her face marked with worry. "You almost left us, Augusto," she said in a low voice. He tried to organize his thoughts, the fragmented memories of the meeting, of the searing pain. A doctor came in and explained the gravity of what had happened. "You had a massive heart attack, Mr. Vilas. If the response hadn't been immediate, you wouldn't be here. You were incredibly lucky." Augusto, with arrogance still faintly pulsing, presumed. "It was one of the Germans, wasn't it? It had to be. Efficient people." The doctor exchanged a look with Augusto's wife before replying calmly and professionally. "No, sir. The person who saved your life, who performed cardiac massage for 6 minutes until our team arrived, was one of your cleaning staff." Augusto blinked, certain he had misheard. "The cleaning staff?" "Yes. Her name is Lívia Silva. Apparently, she's a doctor." The information penetrated the morphine fog and exploded in his mind. The cleaning woman, the slow woman, the incompetent one, the shadow in the blue uniform. He remembered his own contempt, his cruel words. That woman, whom he considered less than nothing, had held his heart in her hands and brought it back to life. For the first time in decades, Augusto Vilas was speechless, the weight of that revelation crushing him against the hospital mattress. The following days in the hospital were a purgatory for Augusto. Confined to the bed, his body weak and his mind haunted, he was forced to take the most difficult journey of his life, a journey into himself. Every beep of the heart monitor was a reminder that its rhythmic, constant sound was a gift, a miracle granted by the hands of the woman he had treated like trash. He replayed every interaction, or lack thereof, with Lívia on a loop. He remembered walking past her in the hallways and not even registering her existence. He recalled his words, spoken aloud for all to hear, about incompetence and the cleaning people, and the venom of his own arrogance now suffocated him. Shame was a fever that consumed him more than any hospital infection. He, who prided himself on being an implacable judge of character and competence, had made the most colossal error in judgment of his life. He didn't just underestimate her, he erased her, and she, in return, gave him his life back. This cognitive dissonance was a torture, dismantling the foundation upon which he had built his empire and his identity. The belief that a person's worth was tied to their job title. On the third day, a new determination replaced the paralyzing shame. Augusto needed to act. With effort, he reached for the phone beside his bed and called his right-hand man at the company, an older, pragmatic director named Martins. His voice was weak, a hoarse whisper, but the order was unequivocal. "Martins, I want you to find out everything about an employee named Lívia Silva, Dr. Lívia Silva. I want to know her story, why she was working for the third-party company, what happened to her career. Use all necessary resources, but be discreet and, above all, respectful." He paused, taking a deep breath. "And Martins, listen carefully. No one from the company, absolutely no one, is to bother her. Her job is secure, obviously, but I want you to contact the cleaning company and ensure her salary is tripled, retroactive to her first day of work, and paid directly by Vilas Corp. This is a matter of honor." He hung up before Martins could reply. Exhausted by the effort, Augusto lay back in bed. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about stocks, profits, or investors. He was thinking about reparations, about how to look at himself in the mirror after discovering that the monster you most despise is, in fact, yourself. Martins's investigation was swift and brutally efficient. In less than 24 hours, the director had a complete dossier on the life and fall of Dr. Lívia Silva. The findings were even more shocking than he could have imagined. 15 years of an impeccable career at the most renowned hospital in the state, publications in medical journals, thank you letters from hundreds of patients, a reputation for ethics and brilliance. And then the abyss. Martins uncovered the sordid details of the corruption scheme she had exposed, falsified reports sold to rush transplant lists for wealthy patients, a moral cancer at the heart of the healthcare system. The retaliation had been surgical and cruel. Using his power, the hospital director orchestrated a smear campaign, accusing her of negligence in a fabricated case, leaking false information to the press, and placing her on an informal blacklist that made her radioactive to any serious medical institution. Over the phone, Martins reported the facts to Augusto in a neutral voice, but with each word, the silence on the other end of the line grew heavier and denser. Augusto listened, and the image of the woman in the blue uniform transformed into that of a lone warrior, brought down by a corrupt and rotten system. His own cruelty, once an act of casual contempt, now seemed like the final kick to someone already down. Shame gave way to a cold fury, not at Lívia, but at the world that had allowed this, and at himself, for having been a blind and stupid participant in that same world. Meanwhile, in her apartment, Lívia lived in a limbo of anxiety, jumping at every phone call. The call that finally came, however, was not what she expected. It was the owner of the cleaning company, the same man who had never bothered to learn her name, now speaking in a nervous and overly polite voice. He informed her, stammering, that by direct and irrevocable order from the presidency of Vilas Corp, she was on paid leave for an indefinite period. And what's more, her salary would be tripled, with the retroactive amount for the past months being deposited into her account by the end of the day. Lívia was speechless. The phone pressed to her ear. The news fell upon her like a net. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. She looked at the room where Helena was playing and felt the knot in her chest loosen for the first time in months. The treatment was secured. But immediately after, a wave of indignation washed over her. Money, was that his answer? A payment to clear his conscience, to buy her silence. The humiliation she had felt was priceless. Before she could process this mix of feelings, a text message arrived on her phone. It was from Martins. The text was formal, inviting her to a meeting with Mr. Augusto Vilas as soon as he was discharged, so that he could thank her personally and discuss matters of mutual interest. The choice was laid out before her, clear as day. Accept the money and disappear, or stay and confront the man who was, at once, the cause of her humiliation and the author of her strange and sudden salvation. For 2 days, Lívia fought with herself. The practical part of her brain, the worried mother, told her to take the money and the peace, to protect herself and Helena from more turmoil. It would be easy. But another part, the woman and the doctor, whose dignity had been trampled, refused to be silenced with a check. It wasn't about revenge, but about rectification. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw not a victim, but a survivor. She owed this to herself. More than that, she owed Helena the example of a mother who does not bow to injustice, who does not let others dictate her worth. With the decision made, a cold calm took hold of her. On the appointed day, she wore neither a white coat nor a blue uniform. She chose a simple but elegant dress, an outfit that was not a disguise but a statement of herself. Upon entering the Vilas Core building, the atmosphere was different. The receptionist, who had previously ignored her, stood up and greeted her by name. "Dr. Silva, good morning. Mr. Martins is waiting for you." The walk to the elevator was under the curious gazes and whispers of everyone. It was the same path she had walked with a bucket in hand, but now each step seemed to resonate with the weight of her true identity. Augusto was not waiting for her seated behind his imposing mahogany desk, the throne from which he delivered his sentences. He stood near the enormous glass window overlooking the city, looking smaller and more fragile than Lívia had ever seen him. His recovery had made him thinner, and the arrogance in his posture had been replaced by a heavy stillness. When Lívia entered the room, accompanied by Martins, who discreetly excused himself, a heavy silence settled between them. They faced each other for a long moment that seemed to contain the months of humiliation and the single minute of salvation. He didn't see the cleaning woman. He saw the woman with an upright posture and a firm gaze that Martins's dossier had described. She didn't see the tyrant. She saw a man who had looked death in the eye and returned different. It was he who broke the silence, his voice hoarse and low, devoid of any trace of authority. "Dr. Silva." "Lívia." He swallowed hard, as if the words were difficult to form. "I don't know where to begin, because thank you and I'm sorry seem like insults next to the reality. What you did for me was give me my life back. What I did to you was inhuman. I was blind, drowning in a prejudice so disgusting that I can't even face it properly. Before anything else, I need to ask for your forgiveness, for my arrogance, for my cruelty, for not seeing the person who was right in front of me." Lívia heard the apology, and the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. She could see in the man before her, not the figure of the tyrant, but the ruins of one, shaken by his own mortality. However, compassion did not erase the scars. She took a deep breath, not to contain her anger, but to organize her pain into words. "I accept your apology, Mr. Vilas," she began, her voice balanced and firm, the voice of a doctor communicating a serious diagnosis. "But it's important to me that you understand what your not seeing cost me. It wasn't just a job, it was my identity. It was 15 years of dedication, of sleepless nights, of study, of lives that passed through my hands, all reduced to the sound of a bucket in a hallway. Your contempt was the echo of the contempt of an entire system that discarded me. While I was scrubbing your floor, afraid I couldn't afford my daughter's health insurance, I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about the injustice of a world where someone's worth is measured by the badge they wear and not the character they possess. Each word was spoken without a tremor, without accusation, just the pure, crystalline truth. It was the first time she had verbalized her pain to one of her tormentors, and in doing so, she felt a weight she didn't even know she was carrying begin to dissipate. Augusto listened to every syllable, without interrupting, without looking away. Livia's speech was not a knife of revenge, but a mirror, and the image he saw reflected was hideous. When she finished, he nodded slowly, his face pale. I understand. No, I don't understand because I've never been in your shoes, but I'm beginning to see, he said, with a humility that was completely foreign to him. He walked back to his desk but did not sit. He leaned against it, as if he needed physical support. Doctor, what happened in that meeting room didn't just save my life, it saved my company. Herr Schmidt, the investor, saw in you what was lacking in me and my entire board. Integrity under pressure. He is willing to invest, but on one condition, that the culture of this company fundamentally changes. Augusto looked directly at her, and for the first time, Livia saw not a boss or a patient, but a potential business partner. That's why I'm not here to offer you compensation. I'm here to make you a proposal. I want you to join us. Not as the company doctor, but as the director of organizational culture and well-being. I want you to help me demolish the toxic structure I created and build something new, something real. I want your voice, your ethics, and your courage on my board. I need someone who has already proven they are not afraid of me. Augusto's offer hung in the air, so vast and unbelievable that Livia felt a sense of vertigo. Her mind, trained to diagnose and analyze, snapped into action. She looked at the proposal from every angle. The risk, the opportunity, the motivation behind it. It was a lifeline, no doubt, but it could also be a gilded cage. She looked at Augusto and saw the sincerity in his tired eyes. He wasn't offering charity. He was desperately trying to fix something he himself had broken, his business and his own soul. And it was on this sincerity that she placed her bet. However, she would not be a passive piece in his game of redemption. She would be a partner, and partners set terms. I accept your proposal, Mr. Vilas, she said, and her voice now held no trace of hesitation. But I have two non-negotiable conditions. The first is that Vilas Corp will fund the best legal team in this country to completely clear my name. I want a public retraction and the start of a formal investigation against the director of the clinical hospital and everyone else involved in the scheme I exposed. I want my honor back. The second is that I will have full autonomy in my position. My decisions and policies for restructuring the company's culture cannot be vetoed, not even by you, without a plausible justification and an open vote by the board. A slow smile formed on Augusto's face, the first genuine smile Livia had seen. On him, there was no arrogance, just immense relief. Your conditions are not only accepted, Dr. Silva, they are exactly what I expected from you. They are proof that I chose the right person. In the following week, Vilas Corp was shaken by an internal earthquake. An official announcement declared the creation of the new Directorate of Organizational Culture and Well-Being and the appointment of Dr. Lívia Silva to the position with an immediate seat on the board. The day she entered the building as a director was a spectacle of poetic justice. The same people who had seen her on her knees now stood as a sign of respect when she passed. During the meeting that sealed the deal with the Germans, Herr Schmidt made a point of standing up, walking over to Livia and shaking her hand in front of everyone. A company's greatest asset is its ability to correct itself and to recognize true human value, he said in his formal Portuguese. Your presence on this board, Dr. Silva, is the reason my group is investing here today. Welcome. At that moment, Lívia was not just saving herself. She had saved the company that had nearly destroyed her. Lívia began her work at Vilas Corp not with the arrogance of an executive, but with the precision of a surgeon and the empathy of a caregiver. Her first action was not to renovate offices or cut costs, but to listen. For weeks, she walked through every department of the company, from the factory floor to the software development floors. She had coffee in the break room with the cleaning staff, her former team, and listened to their complaints about broken equipment and unpaid overtime. She had lunch with the young analysts and discovered the culture of fear and burnout that prevented them from innovating. With the full support of Augusto, who watched her work with silent admiration, Lívia implemented what she called a culture transplant. She created a truly anonymous and reliable whistleblower channel, established a robust mental health program, reviewed compensation policies to eliminate discrepancies, and most importantly, instituted a dignity-first policy. Managers who once ruled by fear were required to undergo empathetic leadership training or seek other opportunities. Gradually, the atmosphere in the company began to change. Fear gave way to psychological safety, and productivity increased as a side effect of happiness and respect. Parallel to her revolution in the company, Lívia's personal battle advanced. With the force of a tank, the Vilas Corp legal team, accustomed to complex corporate litigation, embraced her case with a special fervor. The investigations were reopened, and this time, the witnesses who had previously remained silent out of fear now had the protection and incentive to speak. The press, which had once published the false accusations against her, now smelled the blood of the corruption scandal and turned its spotlights on the hospital director. One evening, while having dinner with Helena, Lívia saw on television the scene she had dreamed of for so long. The director, the man who had ruined her life with a smile on his face, was rushing out of the hospital, cornered by a swarm of reporters, his face a mask of panic. The headline on the screen read, "Director of renowned hospital suspended on charges of leading corruption scheme." At that moment, Lívia's phone rang. It was her lawyer. "Doctor, the medical board has just suspended his license, and 3 more doctors have offered to testify. His house of cards has collapsed." Lívia hung up the phone, looked at her daughter, who was drawing a heart on a piece of paper, and felt justice, true justice, fill the space in her chest that had once been occupied by pain. A year passed. Vilas Corp was no longer the same company. Under the guidance of Lívia and the newfound leadership of Augusto, it had become a model of innovation and humanity. The story of the doctor janitor, who became a director, turned into a corporate legend, attracting the best talent on the market, who were looking not just for a salary, but for a purpose. The culmination of this transformation came on a gala night, when the company received the Best Place to Work award in the country. Augusto took the stage to receive the crystal trophy under a shower of applause. He raised his hand, asking for silence. "Thank you, but I cannot accept this award," he said, his voice echoing through the auditorium. "Because the merit is not mine. The merit belongs to a woman who taught me that the true value of a company is not in its balance sheets, but in the dignity with which it treats every single one of its employees." He turned and looked directly at Lívia in the front row. This company was reborn on the day that Dr. Lívia Silva refused to be invisible. "Please, join me on stage, Director." The entire auditorium rose in a thunderous ovation as Lívia, moved, walked onto the stage, not as the woman who was once humiliated, but as the architect of that victory. That same night, in her new apartment, Lívia placed the heavy crystal trophy on the living room shelf. Helena, now with stable health and rosy cheeks, ran to hug her. "Did we win, Mommy?" Lívia picked her up and smiled, a genuine smile with no remnants of pain. "Yes, my love, we won." Looking at her daughter's happy face, Lívia understood the true dimension of her victory. It wasn't just about defeating the corrupt director or winning a prestigious position. It was about the journey. She had descended to rock bottom, a place of despair and humiliation, and from there she drew strength not to destroy, but to build. She didn't just reclaim her career, she reinvented it on a much larger scale. Before, she saved lives, one at a time, in an operating room. Now, she positively impacted the lives of thousands of families, healing the culture of an entire organization. She transformed the greatest injustice of her life into her greatest source of power and purpose, proving that true overcoming is not about going back to who you were, but becoming the strongest, most whole version of yourself. The poetic justice was complete. The final fate of those who had done wrong served as the somber epilogue to this story of overcoming. The former director of the clinical hospital, the man who orchestrated Livia's downfall, lost everything. With his license revoked by the medical board and facing an avalanche of civil and criminal lawsuits, his name became synonymous with corruption in the media. He, who was once one of the most powerful men in the city's health sector, became a pariah, a ghost in his own life, the exact personification of the invisibility he had tried to impose on Lívia. At Vilas Corp, the old guard of directors who thrived on the culture of fear did not survive the new era of transparency. Unable to adapt to an environment where integrity was worth more than flattery, one by one they withdrew, making way for a new generation of leaders who shared Lívia's and Augusto's vision. Lívia's victory was not contained within the company walls or the courtrooms. It generated a ripple effect, inspiring other professionals to report injustices, proving that the courage of a single person could indeed start a revolution. Years later, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, there were no suits, lab coats, or uniforms. There was only Lívia, a woman at peace, sitting on a park bench watching Helena, now a healthy and vibrant preteen, run and play with her friends. Augusto, whom Helena affectionately called Uncle Guto, was nearby, pushing his own grandson on the swing, a man visibly older, grayer, but with a lightness in his eyes that money had never given him. Looking at that scene, Lívia reflected on the path she had traveled. She realized that life had not broken her, it had forged her. The humiliation, the pain, the despair, it had all been the fire of the furnace that transformed her. She didn't just reclaim her place in the world, she created a much better one. Her greatest achievement was not the award on her shelf or the title on her business card, but right there in that simple, perfect moment, in her daughter's laughter, in the redeemed friendship of a man who learned to see, and in the deep, unshakable certainty that, in the end, the most powerful force in the universe was not power or money, but the resilience of a human heart that refuses to stop fighting for what is right.